Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Securing a Remote Workforce with a Secure Access Service Strategy. My name is Bill Monroe. I am the Senior Director of Product Marketing. If you are a partner with WatchGuard and you do any of our training, you probably know me. So welcome. For all of you who are new, or if you are a potential end customer of the product set, welcome. And thanks for joining us today. We're going to spend about 45 minutes talking about secure access service strategies. And this isn't going to be a product pitch, but we're going to understand how these products work, what the market looks like. And I even put together some guidance and a checklist on if you are going to partner with a vendor or purchase one of these products or offer it as a managed service. So we'll go through all those things today. So let's get going. And let's kind of understand what this whole SASE thing is. And let's start by understanding where it came from. And really where it came from is just how work has changed really dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years, especially with the COVID epidemic. You can safely say the work perimeter today is anywhere where work is being done, and that's literally everywhere. Anywhere from a Starbucks to on an airplane on the internet to driving in a car to being on a boat, because we have so much access today. Everything about that has changed. So today, the world of a hybrid mix of an on-premise environment and remote workers is pretty much standard. But more importantly, there's now a growing world where the traditional on-premise environment doesn't even exist any longer. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. Everyone today uses some sort of public cloud SaaS application. Think Microsoft 365, think Google, and everyone has probably their own personal cloud application set they use, as well as their work, which creates a lot of risk. The bad guys know all of this, and they realize that this is a great vector to target. And so it's also a point of attack that we're seeing grow in the threat intelligence field. So if we think about those risks that the bad guys are going after, we all know that the greatest weak link in the cybersecurity chain is all of us human beings and the actions we take. Rushing through work, clicking on phishing emails, all those sorts of things. Top of mind, just did it, failed the test, had to do the training. Happens to the best of us. But what is different about remote workers? Well, remote workers could be working in their home in an unsecured environment. They may have routers and they've never updated or patched them. They may have an internet provider that has weak security. They could be working in cafes, hotels, any myriad of location where the security perimeter isn't built for that environment. Also, with the knowledge that folks have and the ease of use of all cloud applications, there's a lot of people using applications up in the cloud that IT has no idea that they're using. And this creates one thing we'll talk about a lot today, which is the visibility challenge from an IT and cybersecurity team to see what their remote workers are actually doing when they're on their work devices, actually working from home. Of course, another real challenge is there's not a lot of technology out there to control that user coming back into the environment and the access they're given. VPNs, for example, are just a very clear, secure pipeway in. But if that credential is compromised, it's a secure pipeline in for the attacker. And we've seen that sort of attack happen. SolarWinds started as that sort of attack. The Circle CI attack started as that sort of attack, where the VPN was actually utilized by the attacker to their advantage. And then finally, for cybersecurity teams and IT teams, it just adds another layer of complexity. A remote worker device, a VPN environment that has to be brought in, the policies and security around it. If I'm going to add in some sort of a SASE technology that we're going to talk about, that's even more complexity. The bottom line is how we keep users secure must change. How we think about doing this must change. And let's look at some of these challenges, both from risks and threats, but also from the business side of user experience and cost. So we talked about some of the risks. the inability to control your remote users when they're out there on the internet. And with the one we are seeing most common now is gambling sites. So with the advent of all of the different new gambling sites, the sports gambling sites, we're suddenly picking up a lot of gambling going on when people should be doing work with a lot of the partners we work with, their clients. We also see attacks coming through fake gambling sites that people are falling for phishing attacks and spear phishing attacks having to do with fake gambling sites. So infected websites is a real problem. Downloading infected files. It's bad enough when people use VPN and the attackers compromise their credentials. It's even worse when they're not using VPN at all on their home, on their devices, and they're bypassing it. And the problem, of course, is that they're identifiable by the attacker. You can man in the middle attack their communications because it's not in any sort of secure environment. So there's that issue. Falling victim to phishing attack we talked about. One of the ones we also see that's a real problem is people storing work sensitive data in their private clouds because they have sync set up or they have some sort of cloud storage they use to share files, and it's Google when the company's standard is Microsoft. Another real problem. And then, of course, there's the attacks. We talked about man in the middle. There's malicious payload, especially if you're not using a secure socket. There's the real challenge of credential compromise. It's probably one of the most difficult things to defend beside, zero-day vulnerabilities in different applications. Those two are the really difficult ones. We see a steady flow, and if you read the Verizon data breach report, of keylogger infections that are gathering credentials and breaking them that way. Of course, ransomware has been growing year after year, and VPN hijacking gives you that clear haul in. But there's a whole nother side to this. If you're running, and some of you may know this painfully, if you're running a large VPN remote worker environment and you're backhauling all the people from all around the world or all around the geography where you work back into your network and then out to the internet, that creates a lot of frustration. It creates really poor service for those users, drop-offs of meetings, other types of things. You have what we talked about, both IT being overwhelmed with the number of policies and exceptions dealing with remote workers and the budget required. How do you solve a VPN problem? Throw more hardware at it. That just increased costs and complexity. And as I spoke to, that lack of visibility that the IT team has to what's going on out with those remote workers, what risky activities are part of, what threats. That's the universe we're dealing with in this remote workforce. So back in 2019, Gartner coined the term secure access service edge. And they called it this emerging concept. And really what they did is they kind of created a best practice saying, if these network pieces and these security services were able to be brought together, you could create a much easier model for securing remote workers and securing beyond remote workers the notion of small offices and one office workers or two office workers. And also getting down into some of the use cases, which we'll dig into, which is the notion of a user accessing something private, like the on-premise network, maybe a special private cloud environment that a company may use, but then also the user accessing something public, which can be the internet as a whole, or it can be these SASE workforce solutions like 365 or Google Workspaces, etc. The idea of SASE was to combine network and security functions into a single cloud-based, cloud-managed service. That's the promise. That promise doesn't really exist in the vendor offerings that you find. You'll find some that are very good on the security side. You'll find some that are very good on the software-defined WAN side and weak on security. And you'll rarely find any where they're actually a single combined UI and management environment. We'll talk to that. The goal here is to really simplify the world for IT and create visibility and policy controls that can really secure those remote workers. That's what it was intended to build. That's what SASE is supposed to be. And really, It's these 5 subcomponents. We'll talk a little bit about them, and you can see I've lined them up to where they fit, because what's interesting in SASE is even though Gartner brought all these pieces together in this definition, not all the pieces work together or needed to work together to secure different use cases that you're trying to implement. So firewall as a service, that's probably the easiest one, very easy to understand. If you run a network firewall, a perimeter firewall, it is all the same capabilities you would get, except out as a service in the cloud that you can wrap around a user. Secure web gateway, another pretty simple one to understand. This is just the access to and from the internet from that remote user's device and being able to control where and what that user can do with policies. A software defined wide area network. So this is the ability to change around how a WAN is defined by using different types of connections over the internet. Zero trust network access. So zero trust is a much bigger subject. When you talk about zero trust with SASE, you're really just bringing that zero trust story down to the remote workers accessing and controlling into the on-premise or a private environment. But zero trust expands beyond there in the environment. But when you think about SASE and zero trust, because zero trust is really a strategy in a lot of different products. For example, a core part of zero trust is multi-factor authentication. Another core part of zero trust is inside the perimeter and inside the cloud access control. Yet that's not in this definition of zero trust. So it gets confusing. What we're worried about with zero trust here is that we can strongly identify and authenticate a remote worker coming on premise and control what they can access to a more detailed level. That's the zero trust we're talking about. And then finally, cloud access security broker. So this one's been around for a while as a tool. There's a lot of players out there who create this, but when you go through and look at what they do, you'll find there's a lot of variation. Think about cloud access security at it's really data protection at the user access and application level. So it's going even a layer tighter in zero trust. And in and of itself, it's a type of zero trust solution where you're actually putting policies in place that say when a user accesses a subpart of a Microsoft 365 environment, here's what they can do, here's what they can download, here's what they can see, and here's what they can't do. So those are the major components. Many companies deliver them as individual products. Very few, if any, actually have all of them integrated into a single solution. If we map that over to the use cases, we can look at it and say, okay, remote worker accessing something public. So think of remote workers in a 100% cloud company. I'll actually show you a story around this type of company. What they need primarily is firewall as a service and a software web gateway or a secure web gateway. If you're connecting small remote offices back to the main office and you want to eliminate the need for a firewall firewall at that office, and I will put forward to you that when you talk to really experienced cybersecurity people, they would tell you you still always need the firewall there for the protection. But if you're really tight on budget, this whole notion of SD-WAN with zero trust network access control gives you a level of control and visibility and policy control that's almost equal to what a firewall is. And of course, you could wrap firewall as a service if that user is going into the public internet. For a remote worker accessing something private, now a remote worker from home coming into a network, an on-prem environment or a private cloud environment, we recommend firewall as a service, zero trust network access, and CASB brought together. And then finally, you can bring this a step further and talk to office workers who are accessing something public. And you can actually start to change how you think about your on-premise firewalling by adding in firewall as a service as opposed to hardware firewalls and secure web gateways. So a lot of different use cases that you can walk to. As we go through this webinar, I'm going to really dig into the remote worker accessing something public and the remote worker accessing something private, and really speak to the use cases around protecting remote workers and how SASE fits to that, as opposed to talking to SASE overall. And let me click us forward. So I think one of the most important things you have to understand is that, as we like to say, right, the cloud's not really in the cloud. All you're doing is implementing someone else's big IT infrastructure. The picture there is the Amazon infrastructure in Belgium, right? It's just a giant building, and if you've been watching the news, these giant buildings suck up so much power that they're actually designing small-time nuclear reactors to power them and take them off the grid. So amazing things are happening. But what's important about that is that before you start thinking about adding SASE solutions, make sure you have the critical building blocks for all of your security in place. Make sure that you are operating an EDR tool that has the ability to not only detect signature-based malware, but also behavior-based malware, so that those devices are secure even before you start wrapping the security around and beyond them. That you've got multi-factor authentication in place for your remote workers. This is really critical because a credential compromise can undermine almost any type of cybersecurity. That in your cloud environments, you're using cloud firewalls. So think of it as, if firewall as a service is to wrap security around the remote worker, a cloud firewall is to wrap security around the cloud environment they're accessing, so that you've got that firewall level of protection going in both directions. And then finally, VPNs. They aren't the answer to everything. And by deploying SASE, in most cases, you're going to get an integrated VPN. We do that with our solution, so that you can actually eliminate that infrastructure when you move to SASE. But if you're not there yet, having VPN security is still a critical communication or critical cybersecurity defense point in this process. So start by making sure these pieces are in place. If you haven't done VPN, that's okay if you want to jump into SASE right away, because you're going to get that sort of protection. But endpoint detection and response, multi-factor authentication, and cloud firewalls are critical in this defense game. Now, I want to break down the two use cases we're going to dig into here and make sure everyone understands them. There's a lot of nuance in how to think about remote workers and the use cases that are covered and how SASE works. And so the first is, and this is really also where I strongly believe, and WatchGuard is a strategy, we strongly believe that you start in a SASE rollout, because SASE, being multiple pieces and components, is never rolled out in one single giant scoop. It's pieces as you go that you're mitigating the biggest risk factors. And for our threat intelligence work and our SOC watching environments, the biggest threats are your remote workers accessing something public. So that remote workers, or any worker that's traveling who's connecting through a public Wi-Fi network or their home network, they are accessing SaaS cloud apps, especially Microsoft 365, Google, AWS, those types of environments. That's really the place to start thinking about your threats, because that's the greatest threat surface that the attackers can go after. The next one is the notion of that same remote worker now accessing something private. So instead of those cloud applications, they're coming into some sort of on-prem environment or private cloud environment, file stores, HR records, whatever it may be. The reason this is number two isn't that it's actually less threatening. It's that it is more logical to roll the two out, 1, 2, simply because more people are using those cloud apps and more people on their endpoints have their own personal cloud apps, and that's where the greatest risk is. But these are the two areas to really think about and get started. If you have a large on-premise environment still with legacy applications and a lot of important data, especially things around privacy data, intellectual property, maybe you lean into starting with private access first. So think about where you fall. But let's talk about those two. So what does SASE do for that environment? And what I'm trying to show in this graphic is that if you have an on-premise firewall and you add firewall as a service and secure web gateway, the two critical pieces for securing these use cases. On the right, you're going to see all the pieces that you get, which means firewall as a service is everything you should have with your firewall. DNS filtering, botnet detection, IPS, some sort of an APT vulnerability type cloud sandbox scanner, geolocations and being able to recognize and block geolocations, and gateway antivirus. And then, of course, our secure web gateway is all about our web blocking, URL filtering, and application control. User authentication, multi-factor authentication, as we talked about, is a critical piece of this, should be built into the environment. And then the management of services. This is the big differentiator that you're going to see in the different vendors. It's all about how common and integrated is the SASE control environment with your existing infrastructure? How well does it work with it? Do policies and configuration, do grouping users together and applying policies, do they work the same or close to the same, so that you're not creating a whole bunch of different types of technology, of management interfaces and policies by section, which is the death knell of everyone in cybersecurity. An easy way to set it up and walk through, integration with strong identity and SAML, and the ability to see as much as you can in that single platform, from your SASE environment to your NetSec to your identity environment to your endpoint. These are all the things you want to be looking for when you're looking at solving the problem around those two use cases. And the other piece I want to spend a little time talking about is what are called points of presence. This is a different type of architecture that makes especially the remote worker SASE tools work really well. And what we're talking about here is a company like WatchGuard or anyone else that offers these will go out and work with a cloud host environment like AWS or Google or Azure, and they will create in that environment these deployments, these virtual machine deployments in different physical locations where the data centers are stored. And the idea here is this is your implementation point. And these are called POPs. And what's going to happen is these POPs are working all the time, and you distribute them around the globe, and they're 100% cloud native. And your users, and I'm going to show you how this works, will access those POPs to access the internet and do their work. And so that's why it's so important. Things you want to look for in these POPs when you're talking to vendors, right? Do they have multi-tenancy? And do they have that in both the control and the data plane? Fancy words, what it basically means is I can separate out any individual user accessing any individual environment and keep that data private and separate from everything else. And that's both related to what they're doing and what data is flowing and what applications they're in. Is it built for high performance, right? So is there the capability to run a lot of people through any individual POP, or roll out new POPs or increase bandwidth if you start to get to that top end? And how is the data bound? So here's one of the other tricks. And if you're coming to us from Europe or Canada, this is important. Most of the time, a vendor like us and others will deploy POPs in a lot of different physical locations. I think we have 7 or 8 of them around the world right now. And these POPs will bound the data to that region. So if I'm in Germany or somewhere in the EU, that POP needs to be in the EU to bound data within that environment. And so ask that question, make sure you understand it. The other question to ask is, and actually I have a few things to ask down there, but another question to ask is what happens when someone's traveling? What POP do they access? Can you control that? So questions to ask about POPs, because they're important. Who owns it? So some of the SASE players out there will rent their POPs or will third-party integrate with someone else's POP, and you have to go decide how you're going to deploy that. And many times that costs extra money. So make sure you understand that. How does travel work? If I'm someone from the EU and I'm traveling to South America, how does that data flow and what control do I have and what protections do I have? And finally, what is the bandwidth model for that POP? And you can go on Reddit and other places and read about the complaints people have about these SASE tools. And the biggest complaint I see out there is that the POP performance is getting overloaded and it's no better than a VPN. So you want to make sure that you understand how the vendor who manages the POP does that, how quickly they can increase the flow through that POP or stand up new POPs, those types of things. So POPs are interesting. Why are they interesting? Well, how does it work if one of your remote workers is at home? So let's say we have a remote worker accessing something public. They're going to have on their machine a client that's part of this SASE solution. And that client is going to, when that user logs in and authenticates into that client is going to send information back to the central cloud command center. For us, it's the WatchGuard cloud. Everyone has something similar, or many vendors do. And that information in the WatchGuard cloud or the central cloud management tool, the remote workers, all their policy and identity information is going to be gathered and sent to the POP. The POP becomes your enforcement point. And so now the firewall as a service, the secure web gateway, they start to work with the policy and identity information sent from the command center. And that's how that POP's going to work. And once that user kicks into accessing something public, the integrated VPN kicks in, the traffic's all encrypted. Everything about what that user doing is now wrapped in policies around what they can access and from where they can access it. And the information of where they are and the data flow is encrypted and hidden. And everything that's going on with that user is tracked. And so now you have that visibility. And the same thing happens for a remote worker. Again, the remote worker clicks into the client. Client's going to go back to the central command center, wrap that policy and identity information, send it to the POP they're closest to, and then that user is going to go and have those same protections. So now you can see why the POPs are so important. Understanding how they work is so important. What about the visibility? What should you be able to see in these sort of SASE tools, right? Especially with those remote workers and what they're doing. So here's a good list to go through, right? So from a security point of view, you should be able to see the threats that were blocked, the malware that has showed up, the applications and websites that were blocked, and how the traffic by country and by location of that user and what they're accessing is being filtered and blocked. So it should give you a really good insight into how these remote users are working every day and what risks are created and what threats are trying to attack their environment. You should also be able to see significantly around how your traffic is flowing all around the world. And this is great visibility to understand what users are using what applications, what users are using applications they shouldn't be, and you have to add blocks into it. What websites are they visiting? Which ones are okay? Which ones are not? And add policy control into it. Once you start to see what's happening, you start to more easily be able to understand how you're going to manage people and what groups need what sort of access and control. Who are your most active users by location, by amount of traffic, by blocks and activity. And then there's also all the information about your remote users. So for the first time, you're going to have really nice visibility to overlay what you're getting off your endpoint device to see who the authenticated users are, who's failing authenticated, what devices are they coming in from, what policies are being applied by user and group and individual, what operating systems are they working on, all the information about the client that they have, of course, and all the information around both your active and inactive users in that remote workforce environment. So this visibility in of itself makes these SASE tools for remote workers really powerful because it gives you a level of control that you won't otherwise have. The other piece that's important to understand is how the vendor is going to manage that environment. And I just threw some screenshots of our system. But what you're looking for is commonality, simplicity, things that are being done the way it's used to being done, and integration and integration and identity, right? So you can see here, right? What do we care about? Well, are the interfaces clear and easy to use? Is the terminology consistent? Does the terminology align with how you deploy and manage your firewall environment? Is everything centrally managed? And is it as single pane and simplified as possible? Are all the TLS certifications managed automatically, or is that a whole nother thing I've got to do? How do we set up identities? And is identity integrated with SAML? And what identities can we use? How do we set up different types of policies? Can I create groups of users and then have groups of policies so I can do easy cross matching? Or do I have to set up lots of one-to-one policy creations? And then finally, how's the client managed? And can I use my remote management tools to push those clients out? And is that process easy with the user? So all things to think about with management. And a big piece to look at is the vendor a network vendor, or are they a cybersecurity vendor, or are they both? It's challenging for a cybersecurity vendor who's never done firewalls to then build a SASE tool and make it manage and simple like a firewall because they've not done firewalls. It's challenging for network vendors to be really good at the security side and have all of the capabilities of the firewall. So as you're looking at the vendors you're choosing, make sure it's lining up with those use cases and the security controls you're worried about. Here's a company. They were part of an initial beta. I'm not going to use their name because I only have it. I don't have it for public. But they were part of our initial beta, and they're one of our customers using FireCloud, which is our tool. And so I went back and just asked them some questions about their experience, both as part of the beta and the rollout. So you have 180 remote workers. This is they really were worried about SASE internet access. This is primarily a 100% cloud company. So they have no real on-prem environment. They do pharmacy services all over the world. They work with 65,000 different pharmacies nationwide. And so not a small company. And their operations are fairly sophisticated. What were the problems they were talking about? When their IT team came back, their problems were none of the employees liked the VPN they were using, and they were all finding ways to not use it and avoid it. The IT team was complaining that they were spending too much on the VPN, and the hardware they had deployed to make the thing work for the 180 users was getting way too high for the value. The IT security team was complaining that they didn't have visibility on what was happening and the risks in those endpoints. So those were the really key pieces that these folks were worried about. And when they started using a SASE product, and they were very focused, I said, on that public internet access deployment, that's where they began this journey. For them, it was the visibility into seeing what those remote workers were doing and understanding the risks out there, especially because they had compliance requirements they had to meet, and they were really challenged in that area to prove that compliance. Their end users enjoyed the experience better. Now, some end users complained because they couldn't hit their gambling sites that they wanted to, but hey, it was on the company's dime, so too bad. But most of the users were found that they could be on their Zoom calls, they could be in their team calls, they weren't running into drop-off problems, and they had a better experience because that POP environment had suddenly distributed that load and made life easier for them. The IT team liked it because it was a single dashboard to allow them to do both all of their security and network policies around their SD-WAN and those pieces because they use that here. And then finally, cost savings. By getting rid of the VPN infrastructure and reducing workload, overall, it was a win-win for them. So happy client. These are the type of stories that you're going to find when you look at these sort of case studies. Let me talk a little bit about FireCloud, just one slide here, and then we're going to do a couple final pieces and I'll open up for Q&A. I know we've got some questions already. So FireCloud is WatchGuard's SASE solution. FireCloud is the first part of our deployment. We have what's called internet access out and available right now. We just launched it a month ago. We have what's called FireCloud Private Access. It's going to start in beta in the summer and be launched in GA. So think of internet access as that first use case. Think of private access as the second, where you have workers that want to come into an on-prem environment. That will beta this summer and be released in GA. Internet access, that first use case where you're bringing everyone up to that cloud environment. Think Google, Microsoft, AWS, Salesforce, etc. That has been released and is out being deployed now. What makes FireCloud different? Well, one is it is built out as a true natural extension for our fireboxes. So if you use a WatchGuard firewall, and you go into WatchGuard Cloud and you look at the way these policies are built, look at the way that we ID and integrate in authentication, look at the way we manage that end user, it's all the same. And so it's really simple if you're used to our environment. So if you are a WatchGuard user, this is a great story because you're going to find that the learning curve is basically flat. You're going to get it right away, look at it, it's going to make sense. It's just another menu within the WatchGuard Cloud. And the way we build and bring our user groups together and then apply policies to them is just like what we do with the Firebox. We also took the time to really invest in a global POP architecture, sorry, and that's growing. So we've got a model where we've got, like I said, 7 or 8 POPs around the world right now. As we are seeing increased use, we're rolling out more POPs. We have it's actually easy for us to roll them out in the way we architected that environment. But the beauty for all of you is it's all behind the scenes. We manage it all. It's included in the price. You don't see any of it. And so unlike a lot of the other vendors, we really reduced that problem of having to figure out what the POPs are going to do and how they're going to work. And then finally, it's just ease of management, just in all of the tools. And one of the reasons we were a little later in bringing this out is we really wanted to get the simplicity of this right so that for our partners and our clients, this was just going to be as easy as it could be. And I think we've accomplished that. So if you're interested in FireCloud Access, you can email the email I have on the last slide. Reach out through our website. There's a great page about what FireCloud Internet Access does and how it works. There's a data sheet. There's a great technical paper that talks about it in some detail, and that will allow you to find more data on it. I really recommend talking to us, getting a demo of it, and running a pilot. It's very simple to set up, and I think you'll find it really effective for you. So if you're interested in taking this journey with us, like I said, FireCloud Internet Access, public remote user to public cloud is available. Private access, which is remote user to the on-prem environment or to a private cloud, that beta's this summer and launches in September. And then we have a longer term roadmap plan that we can have a presentation on that shows what we're going to do on the SD-WAN side. We already have that capability. It's how we're integrating it. And then also what we're going to do on the cloud access security broker side, which are both forthcoming in our roadmap. So why do this now, right? Why move into this remote worker use force? Well, we've talked about it's really about improving that client security posture and really giving that visibility to what's going on with those remote workers. It's also enhancing that remote worker user experience even while you're wrapping that security around them to keep your company protected. We're finding that in our deployments, it actually reduces overall operational costs versus running a large VPN environment. And it's going to give you that agility and scalability as your remote workforce grows, as your cloud world grows, and your cloud applications grow to really stay caught up with it and be able to use this. Of course, it works with your existing infrastructure, whether that's WatchGuard or something else. And because we're doing this as a roadmap of these different components we're building out, it's really future-proofing the needs that you have because you can be involved with the betas and the bringing this product out to market. And final piece before we get to questions, I wanted to spend a little bit of time putting together a checklist for you, right? So if you're doing this, here are the questions to ask. Here are the things that if you're talking to vendors, you make sure you understand. And the first one is going back to make sure those security building blocks are in place. EDR and strong authentication are the top two. Make sure they're out there and they're working and you've got good deployments because they are the backbone of putting your control environment in place to protect both your on-prem and your remote workers. Cloud firewalls for those cloud environments. If you use, Firebox Cloud, it's a great solution for protecting cloud environments. And having a VPN in place. And again, the VPN can be replaced when you roll out this SASE environment. Then start with assessing what your risk is and what your environment looks like. So understand who are your remote workers? What are your cloud apps you're using? What is your on-prem and hybrid need? What are your compliance needs? This is one that's really important because for a lot of different compliance rules out there, you really do have to prove and show that your remote workers are included and protected. And what are your visibility needs around risk and threats for those remote workers? What is your risk tolerance in that environment? Then as we talk about where to start, public internet access, again, for WatchGuard is the greatest threat, and that's a great place to start. Private access is a close number two. And as I said before, our public internet access solution is out and available. Private access betas this summer. It's coming very soon. Rolls out our GAs in September. And think about how you're going to stage your rollout and what products these SASE tools are going to touch. How is it going to work with your existing firewall deployments? How does it integrate with the clients you already have operating on your endpoints? What cloud applications are there and what sort of protections do you already have in place? Where are you going to create overlap and where are you going to create complementary controls? Where can you eliminate overlap and reduce your dependency on tools? So all that's important. Then when you start looking at the tools, the first thing to understand is, are you a cloud or a hybrid focused use case? Make sure you understand where that falls in your use case model so that you can understand the rollout steps you need for coverage. Make sure their licensing models match your needs. So like all new markets, and SASE is relatively new, 2019, first defined, products weren't out till after that. Most of the initial tools were built for really large Fortune 1000 organizations. And that means that they are big and complex and integrated for people that operate full SOC environments. If you are not that, then look very carefully at how their licensing models match your needs. Some of them bundle it all together and you buy it all. Some of them have very complex bundling pieces. You have to really pick and choose what you're going to deploy to cover those use cases. Make sure you take the time to do that. And for those capabilities, make sure there's value to the price you're going to pay. Make sure it covers that use case and you've defined those pieces out. Understand their POP infrastructure and are there extra charges? Are they sending that out to third parties and you have to pay someone else? Are they sending it out to Google or Azure and you've got to double the licensing? Make sure you understand that. One that's near and dear to my heart, if you know me, I come out of the threat detection and response markets. That's what I've been doing in cybersecurity for a long time. Does your SASE solution that you're looking at from the vendor integrate with a threat detection and response solution so that you have Overwatch on it? Is it integrated in the XDR? The simple example is with our ThreatSync Plus family of threat detection and response solutions, we actually suck in the logs out of FireCloud so that we can watch it and we can integrate it into the larger threat detection and response story. That's really important to have that larger umbrella layer of visual around attacks coming in. And then finally, what's their support infrastructure look like? There are a lot of startups in the space. There are a lot of very targeted companies in the space. And if you go under Reddit, the complaints you're going to hear is couldn't get someone on the phone, wasn't 24/7. So make sure they match your needs there. And then finally in rollout, right? Run a trial or a POC. Look at how easy it is to deploy on those end user environments. Make sure the operating systems for the clients cover the end users you have. Walk through the setup of the policies, the user groups. How simple is it? How quickly can you do it? What's the visibility look like? And then finally, make sure you're working with someone who's out there as a vendor who, one, is going to be around and not acquired in a couple of years because they're a smaller player. Two, they offer really solid 24/7 support, good product training, and really they're out there to support, you as an end user, and they work with whoever your trusted partner is or salesperson is, and you as a partner, where you can actually create and run this as a business. So I hope that this was useful for everyone. Like I said, we're going to share the slides. You can use that checklist. And if you would like to learn more about FireCloud, you can email that. Or if you'd like to get your CPE credits, you can email that email and we'll set that meeting up or take care of the credits for you. And if you're not familiar with our managed service, What we do with our managed service is we operate it through our partners. So our partners actually bring it to you via us on the back end doing the work for you. It's a great way to up your security game very quickly with a really solid offering, and then build out your security all around it that you want to do if you're a managed service provider or a partner. And so we have that coming. And then shortly after that, we have the whole hardware refresh. So it's going to be a really busy year at WatchGuard, and we're really excited with the tools that we're going to bring everyone. Also, watch for a roadshow that we're building out right now. We're going to hit 20, 25 different cities all around the world, and we're going to be talking about all of these different new capabilities coming and what it means for you as a client or as a partner. So really exciting stuff. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to close out the webinar because I think we got through all the questions, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Tuesday. Look forward to seeing everyone on any sort of Accelerate training or product launch training or the road shows that are coming up over the next year, and getting to meet and know all of you. So appreciate you all being here and giving your time. Have a fantastic day, and thank you.